Hello, true duelists. My name's Craig Fee, and welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! Single Card History, a series where I talk about some of the cards that have impacted Yu-Gi-Oh! Throughout the years, and sometimes some of the other ones that didn't. Today's card, the face of one of the last truly good TCG exclusive archetypes to win a YCS, it's Kozmo, Dark Destroyer. Dark Destroyer was first released in Dimensions of Chaos in 2015 as a secret rare for a reasonably priced like $200, good God, with notable reprints including a gold secret rare in Premium Gold, Infinite Gold in 2016, and most recently, as I make this video, in Maximum Gold in 2020 as a Premium Gold rare. For time on the ban list, it went right to Limited on the August 2016 ban list, where it stayed for about 2 years, before the September 2018 ban list would move it up to semi-limited, and then back up to unlimited 3 months later on the December 2018 ban list, where as of this video, it's been ever since. A level 8 Dark Attribute Machine-type monster with 3000 attack and 1800 defense, its effect reads: if this card is normal or special summoned, you can target one monster on the field, destroy it. Your opponent cannot target this card with card effects. If this card is destroyed by a battle or card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card from your graveyard, special summon one level 7 or lower Kozmo monster from your deck. This is a Sith Infiltrator, which is a ship from Star Wars mixed with the broomstick from the Wizard of Oz. I don't know what the fuck broomstick they're talking about, probably in the book, and truthfully, I don't even remember the goddamn ship from Star Wars, so the only take I have on Star Wars, broadly speaking, is that since the last official game made by LucasArts before that studio was dissolved was, of course, the Connect Star Wars, the last truly objective piece of canon in the Star Wars lore was this.
I'm so happy that it's over now. The pain is gone. I'm putting on my shades to cover up my eyes. I'm jumping in my ride. I'm heading out tonight. I'm solo. I'm Han Solo. I'm Han Solo. I'm Han Solo. Solo.
You're not allowed to dispute that. Dark Destroyer is the face of Kozmo as a deck for most people. It's either that or Farm Girl, but Farm Girl is really only notable because it can get you to Dark Destroyer, so I'm going to focus on that instead. This card is the card that truly allowed Kozmo to go from a good deck to a truly top tier one, at least in my opinion. After the archetype's debut in Clash of Rebellions, it did well at events as an OTK strategy. But once Dimension of Chaos dropped, the deck could actually OTK far more easily thanks to the simple monster destruction that Dark Destroyer offered. Oh, and you know, it being a 3K untargetable beater. Up until 2015, a vast majority of solutions to problems involved targeting. Generic tools like Silent Honor Arc or Castel were in most extra decks, or at the very least Castel was, and the off-brand tools like Dark Rebellion Dragon were all things that had effects that targeted. The same goes for things that try to negate effects. Cards like Breakthrough Skill, Effect Veiler, or even older cards that were still kinda seeing play in certain decks like Fiendish Chain, all targeted and were all completely useless against Kozmo monsters, especially Dark Destroyer. Even better, if you do destroy it through some kind of non-targeting effect, things like Dark Hole or Regeki or Exciton Knight, it can banish itself from the grave to float into a lower leveled Kozmo, including a 2800 untargetable beater that would float again. Or maybe they'd go for the 2300 floating monster that could pop a spell or trap on summon, or a copy of Farm Girl that would search another copy of Dark Destroyer if it could deal damage to tag into said Dark Destroyer as a quick effect and pop again, because Dark Destroyer is just a bit of a force like that. The minute Dark Destroyer hit the game, the deck became a very solid one, and it started to see tops pretty much immediately because of just how effective the deck was at getting an OTK off. And if it couldn't, you could simply sit on your untargetable floating machines, which could be a major pain in the ass to play around. And thanks to the 9/11 ban list where Konami destroyed the towers, Kozmo went from a great deck in the meta to one of the only decks in the meta, with the end of the Duelist Alliance format and all their decks being taken over by the likes of Kozmo, Monarchs, and PK Fire. The last great named deck in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! PK Fire, I do need to mention that every time it comes up. It's It's an actual name, not just fucking archetypes thrown together. Kozmo's strength in the meta was reliable for quite some time, as Konami was pretty slow rolling and limiting things like emergency teleport to hit this deck, as Kozmo was a TCG exclusive back when they got 4 waves of support, so it just got better for about 2 sets. And in the last wave of support that Kozmo got, it would really solidify its strategy, giving the deck not only a trap in Cosmojo, which would let you destroy your own ships to perform a non-targeted banish and, get your floats, but also a great card to float into in Tin Can. Tin Can's a level 1 that, like all the psychic pilots of Kozmo, can quick effect tag into a bigger ship, and in the end phase it'll pay 500 life points to reveal 3 differently named Kozmo cards, to have 1 randomly added to your hand and send the others to grave, which is notable because if the opponent did happen to get Dark Destroyer, it would go to your hand, and if it didn't, then it would go to your grave where you could revive it with Call of the Haunted. And even better, if your opponent destroyed your Dark Destroyer, you could float into Tin Can and search that other one in the end phase, since it doesn't really matter if it ends up in the hand or the grave through Call of the Haunted or the Tin Can, it would end up back on the field. Something that a lot of people really fucking hated back in the day. Call of the Haunted also offered an extra little bit of synergy, since you could pop your own Call of the Haunted with something like Slip Rider to destroy that same ship that Call of the Haunted is attached to get another float for another monster for more sorts of plays. It was a fantastic little deck when it didn't brick, and while it saw its most success as a pure variant, there were other variants that showed up over time. One popular one in the peak of Kozmo was Fire King Kozmo. Utilizing the then new Fire King Island, the deck could use Island to destroy the ships in your hand to get a copy of a Fire King monster, which would then let you summon a Kozmo monster for free. This helped the deck to play around its reliance on normal summons, and could really elevate the ceiling of the deck for more wombo combo potential. With access to things like Cosmo Dark Lady for a generic monster negate, and even being able to make Infinity for that Cyber Dragon negate because they have level 5 machines, the ceiling for the deck was much higher, although arguably at the bit of a cost of more garnets in the form of a little chicken Garunix. Whether or not you thought this was the best variant or not depended on how TCG pilled you were, but still it was a pretty popular variant in its time. A build that was also popular that went in the exact opposite direction in terms of turn 1 boards was Demise Kozmo, taking in card of Demise because you already kind of did that shit with Tin Can shenanigans anyways. You just play a bunch of traps, normal your Kozmo monster of choice to tag into your ship, and then at the end phase, if you have any extra Kozmo cards, they go to the grave to revive with your Call of the Haunted or Oasis of the Dragon Souls or what have you. This build would even go to play Pot of Duality because finding those key traps and lower level monsters wasn't that important, and it's not like you were going to be doing any special summoning under Demise anyways. In my opinion, Demise is probably a more true to Kozmo's strength build, although I do respect people who hate it because it is annoying as hell to deal with as a deck. The last deck that paired with Kozmo was ultimately True Draco, for similar reasons as it had to pair to with Fire Kings. Dragonic Diagram is a field spell that can destroy a card in your hand to search for their archetypal cards, which of course can trigger the Kozmo ships to float, allowing you to plus off of your searching before you get to summon a True Draco monster to let you plus off your opponent having the audacity to use card effects in a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Seriously, what the fuck are True Draco cards? Really, the only synergy between the decks is Dragonic Diagram, very similar to Fire King with Fire King Island. True Draco builds are much more heavy on the True Draco engine comparatively though, which is a good or a bad thing. I think that this is a case of 2 decks that work well enough together to get by, but neither really functions fantastically better combined. They can do just as well apart is the point that I'm getting at. It's not that it's bad, it's just that the synergies live, die, and stop by Dragonic Diagram, and then if you want to, tribute summon Dynamite, Fight, Night, fuck, you can do that. You can do that. I hate it because it's fucking true. I'm a hater. These days, Kozmo isn't seeing a ton of play, thanks to the power creep and the fact that even with its field spell's ability to mulligan hands, the deck ultimately runs some number of high-level monsters with no effect to special summon themselves, relying entirely on the low-level pilots to get them out. With the new Fire King structure deck, Dark Destroyer coming off of the list. I'm sure some people have tried a more modern take on Fire King Kozmo builds, but being realistic, there was a significantly better engine to tech in with Fire King in 2024. Still, Kozmo is as much its own deck as it is Dark Destroyer. The card represented to a lot of people in 2015 and 2016 power creep itself. Many people hated this deck, as it was so resistant to so many of the previous cards and metas, like I've mentioned, its untargetable status being a major pain for rogue decks in its time, and you can find plenty of threads on Reddit from that era where people talk about how stupidly strong it is. I saw someone say that Kozmo was power creep the deck, which is really fucking funny to hear in like the present day. Don't get me wrong, the current meta can clear it with no problems, but Dark Destroyer is admittedly decent. Like, it's immune to SP Little Knight or the ancient Nightmare Unicorn plays with IP Masquerena. You can't use Fenrir on this shit, you can't Pankratops it, and countless other cards because you can't target the ships, and if you do target the pilots, they can quick effect tag out. So there is a decent amount of like future-esque proved strength to Kozmo. It's just so fucking weak to bricking and being so normal summon dependent. But Kozmo players will tell you that this is the deck of the TCG that never really got its own OCG specific support. Don't ask them about kaijus, they don't want to talk about that, they want to talk about their own fucking deck. The point being, if it does get support as a deck in the future, I think Dark Destroyer is just solid enough to still be reliable in the current meta, provided they can find a way to get around the deck's obnoxious bricking problem. I don't think they can, but I have hopium and copium. Maybe I just really love my old deck from 2015 too much, who fucking knows. Overall, Dark Destroyer was an absolute powerhouse of its time, being a powerful card in the meta when it debuted, one that stayed a threat to rogue decks for a solid year, and one that earned the hate of its opponents and love of its players. I think it's still a pretty solid card, even if the deck is by and large power creeps, thanks in large part to the lack of consistency and the fact that, good God, have you seen modern combos? I don't even want to think about what that refers to when this video is 4 years old. And if nothing else, this deck has the coolest fusion of two themes for an archetype that it's based on, because Wizard of Oz and Star Wars, that's genius. It's so smart I can't even finish saying Star Wars properly. That's how fucking cool it is. And it's Yu-Gi-Oh! It's gonna get support. Let me fucking hope, damn it. Either way, it's solid, it's annoying, you hate it or you love it, it's motherfucking Dark Destroyer. And so that's our look at Kozmo Dark Destroyer in this episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Single Card History. Stay tuned for our next video, and feel free to suggest some cards to review or what type of video it is you'd like to see. Don't forget to like, and as always, subscribe to YGO Strats to impress your smoking Italian wife, and so you too can be a true duelist.